You want me to start from the beginning? Fine. But I need you to understand something first before I say any of it. I need you to understand that I'm not a hero. I wasn't trained for any of this. I was a cargo manifest checker on a frontier trade station at the edge of explored space, and the most dangerous thing I'd dealt with in the previous 4 years was a dockworker who tried to smuggle 12 crates of unregistered protein paced through Bay 19. I caught him. He cried. That was my life. So when people call me what they call me now, when I see the coverage, when my sister sends me the feeds, I want you to put on the record that I didn't do what I did because I was brave. I did it because there was a child in front of me and something awful was happening to her, and I couldn't walk away from that. I think most people wouldn't be able to walk away from that. I just happened to be the one standing there. That's all it was. That's all it ever was. Okay. Let me tell you about Velos 9. Part 1, Chapter 1, The Station at the Edge of Reasonable. Account of Nathaniel Rourke, supplemented by station records and secondary witness testimony. Velos 9 wasn't the kind of place that made it onto the tourist feeds. It wasn't ugly exactly, it was just honest. That's the word I always used when people asked me why I'd taken a posting out there instead of staying in the inner ring. I'd say, it's honest. And they'd look at me like I'd grown a second head. Because who leaves a comfortable cargo posting on Titan Station for a 6-year contract on a frontier trade hub at the edge of the contested margin? Me, apparently. The station had been built in the early 2240s as part of the second expansion push. One of those utilitarian cylinder designs that the UEF's infrastructure department cranked out like they were stamping cookies. You had the Central Commerce Ring on Level 4, which was a wide circular corridor about half a kilometer in circumference, lined with trader stalls and vendor booths, and the kind of noodle shops and protein bars that spring up wherever there's enough foot traffic to justify the lease. Above that, on 5, 6, and 7, you had the residential blocks and the admin offices and the medical bay. Below, on 2 and 3, cargo processing and docking manifests, my world. And Level 1, right at the bottom of the cylinder, was the docking ring itself, where the ships came in from every corner of the explored systems. The station held about 4,000 people on a busy rotation. Maybe 2/3 of those were humans, UEF citizens mostly, with a scatter of independent colonists and frontier traders. The rest were non-human residents, which was the official term, or just the folks, which was what the long-timers called them. Because that's the thing about a place like Velos 9, that the people in the inner ring don't always get. Out here on the frontier, you've been living next door to the Keth and the Mavorian Collective and the Sorisi trade guilds for long enough that they're just neighbors. The Keth family that ran the textile stall on Level 4, Old Marin Keth, big as a refrigerator unit, 7 arms, smelled faintly of copper and engine oil. She'd been on Velos 9 longer than I'd been alive. Her daughter Yissa had gone to the station school with the kids of half the human dockworkers. The Galactic Sovereignty representatives were different, though. They were always different. The Sovereignty, the GSA, technically, the Galactic Sovereignty Assembly, had been present on stations like Velos 9 for about 30 years, ever since the Margin Accords had opened frontier trade to their member species. But present was a diplomatic word. What the Sovereignty actually was, out on the frontier, was a set of 3 or 4 species that had decided they were more civilized than everyone else, and had spent the better part of a century building political structures to enforce that opinion. They moved in groups, they wore their rank markings, they're soldiers, and they were soldiers, even when the official paperwork called them trade security escorts. They moved through places like Velos 9 like they were doing the universe a favor by existing in the same atmosphere as the rest of us. I'd dealt with them in cargo processing plenty of times. Polite enough when they needed something stamped, cool and formal when they didn't. I'd learned to read them the way you learn to read weather on a planet with complicated seasons. You watch for certain signs and you adjust accordingly. I'd never had real trouble with them. Not until October 14th. That morning started like most mornings on the station. I was in Bay 9 on Level 2, running a manifest check on a Sorisi hauler that had come in late the night before carrying agricultural equipment, and I suspected considerably more than agricultural equipment. The cargo inspector on the previous shift had flagged 6 of the 18 crates as weight anomaly pending review. which was code for somebody packed something heavy in there and hoped nobody'd notice, and now it was my problem. My scanner was giving me readings that didn't quite add up, and I was crouched next to crate 14 going through the secondary scan protocol when my comms unit buzzed. It was Delora, the admin assistant for the Level 4 commerce ring. "Rourke, you got a minute?" "I've got about 17 problems," I said, not looking up from the scanner. "Minutes are scarce. What do you need?" "I've got something weird up here. Thought you should know about it before I call security." That got my attention. Delora had been on the station 11 years. She didn't use the word weird lightly. "How weird?" I asked. "I don't know, that's the thing." A pause. I could hear the ambient noise of the commerce ring behind her, the market sounds, the hum of the ventilation, the particular murmur of a few hundred people going about their morning. "There's a child, Nate. A Sorisi child, I think, but she's young enough that I can't. She's very young. And she's alone. And she's been sitting by the threshold arch near stall 42 for about 2 hours, and nobody's come for her." I set down the scanner. 2 hours? At least, I only noticed her about 40 minutes ago, but Priya at the noodle cart says she's been there since early morning. Hasn't moved. Hasn't eaten anything, just sitting there. I thought about it. A lost child on a station was unusual. The station systems were good enough that kids usually didn't go long without being flagged, but it wasn't unheard of. Ships sometimes came in carrying families who weren't on the official manifests. Workers brought their kids along when childcare fell through. Things happened. But 2 hours alone on the commerce ring. "I'll come up," I said. "You don't have to." "I'll come up." Level 4's commerce ring was already running at about half capacity when I got there. The morning crowd was a mix: human traders, a few Keth from the residential blocks doing their shopping, 2 Mavorian delegates moving in careful formation with their security team, a handful of Sorisi in the bright threaded robes they favored for station wear. It was loud, the way it always was. Vendors calling out. Someone running a quality test on a batch of synthesized fabric a few stalls down, the fabric making a high whirring sound when it stretched. The smell of something frying. Marin Keth's cousin ran a stall that did a remarkable thing with protein compound and spiced oil that smelled incredible and tasted like it was trying to apologize to you. I found the threshold arch near stall 42. It was one of the old architectural features from the original station design, a wide decorative arch in the wall that framed a viewport looking out at the star field. The station's designers had put them in at regular intervals because somebody in 2243 had decided that access to exterior views was good for mental health. They were right, probably. The arch at 42 framed a particularly good view. You could see the edge of the Velos system's asteroid belt from there, and on clear rotations, the distant smear of the Anchorus Nebula. The child was sitting on the floor beneath the arch. My first thought was small. She was extremely small. Even accounting for the fact that Sorisi tend to be slender by human standards, she looked very young, maybe 4 or 5, if I was mapping Sorisi development stages onto a human equivalent, which isn't always reliable but was the best I had. She had the characteristic Sorisi coloring, pale blue-gray skin, almost the color of overcast sky, with the faint luminescent tracery that runs along Sorisi necks and shoulders, which in adults is barely visible but in the very young tends to be quite bright. Hers was a soft, steady gold. She was wearing clothes that were clean but not fancy, a kind of wrap garment in dark green, fastened at her shoulders, small shoes that had seen some wear. She was holding something in her hands, a small object round about the size of a fist. She was turning it over and over very slowly, the way you hold onto something when you're scared and the thing in your hands is the only anchor you've got. She wasn't crying. That was the thing that got me. She wasn't crying. She was just sitting there with that still, careful quietness that children have when they've been scared for long enough that the scared part has gone somewhere inside and left a kind of surface calm behind it. I've seen that look before. I know what it means. I crouched down a few feet away from her, which is the right distance, close enough to be present, far enough to not loom. "Hey," I said. Then, because I wasn't sure she understood standard, I tried the 3 words of Sorisi I actually knew. Riel, Messathai. "Hello, you're safe." The child looked up at me. Her eyes were large, the way Sorisi eyes often are, with that double iris that gives them the appearance of looking at two things at once. They were a dark amber color, almost the same shade as old circuit boards. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said very quietly in accented but perfectly understandable standard, "I know that's not quite right, the second phrase, but I understand what you meant." I blinked. "Oh," I said. "The correct form is mesativel," she said. "The vel is at the end, but it was very kind of you to try." I sat down on the floor next to her, which wasn't dignified but felt like the right thing to do. "Fair enough," I said. "I'm Nate, what's your name?" She thought about this for a moment, like she was considering whether to answer. "Riel," she said finally. "Riel," I repeated. "Where are your parents, Riel?" The careful quiet came back. She looked down at the object in her hands. "They're not here," she said. It wasn't an evasion, exactly. It was just an answer that contained much more than it said, and I could tell she was giving me exactly as much as she could write now, and no more. "Okay," I said. "That's okay. Are you hungry?" She looked up at me again. "A little," she said, like it was a small confession. "Okay," I said. "Let's fix that first and then we'll figure out the rest." Part 1, Chapter 2, What She Carried. There's a place on the commerce ring, not really a stall, more of a wide alcove with seating, where a human woman named Cass Thurridge runs what she calls a generalist refreshment service, which means she sells hot drinks and simple food and doesn't ask a lot of questions. She's been doing it for about 15 years. She knows how to read a situation. When I walked in with Riel, Cass took one look at both of us, set a cup of something warm and sweet in front of the child without being asked, put a mug of coffee in front of me without being asked, and went back to wiping down her counter. I appreciated that about Cass. Riel wrapped both hands around the cup and breathed in the steam. "What is this?" she asked. "Warmed honey compound and spice extract," Cass called from behind the counter. "It's not going to hurt you, little one. I know your people's diet requirements." Riel took a careful sip. Her expression changed in that very small way children's faces change when something tastes unexpectedly good. A slight widening of the eyes, a tiny almost smile. "Thank you," she said, very formally, and drank. I sat across from her and waited. You learn when you work a station long enough that some information comes faster if you don't chase it, especially from children. We sat like that for about 5 minutes, me with my coffee, her with her cup, the morning commerce ring humming around us before she said, "The sovereignty soldiers took my mother." I kept my face still. "When did that happen?" I asked. "Yesterday," she said. "In the mid-cycle, we came in on the Thuris 5 transit from the outer colonies." She paused. "My mother had documents. She said the documents were correct, but the soldiers said they weren't." Another pause. "They took her to a review room on level 1, and they told me to wait." She looked down at the cup. I waited. I thought about what she was saying, and about what I knew, which was not much but more than nothing. The Sovereignty's trade security escorts had expanded their presence on Velos 9 about 6 months ago. Some kind of new enforcement protocol that had come down from their assembly, which the UEF station management had reluctantly agreed to because frontier stations like Velos 9 operated under a joint jurisdiction framework, and the political complications of refusing were considerable. What it meant in practice was that sovereignty soldiers could conduct what they called document and status reviews on non-human travelers in the transit zones of Level 1. What it meant in further practice was that they occasionally detained travelers for reasons that weren't always obvious, in a process that had very few external checks. I'd heard about it. I hadn't seen it used on a child's parent before. "Is anyone with your mother?" I asked. Riel shook her head. "She said she'd come back in an hour. She didn't come back." A beat. "She told me to find a safe place and wait and not to draw attention, so I went to the arch, with the window, because I thought if I was near the stars I would." She stopped. "I'm not sure why I went there, it just felt right." "It's a good spot," I said. She looked at me with those amber eyes. "Are you going to help me?" she asked. "Or are you going to call station security?" "Both, probably," I said honestly. "But first I'm going to finish my coffee." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but something. "The documents are real," she said quietly. "My mother's documents are correct. She's a registered trade traveler under the Sorisi Guild Compact. She has every right to be here." I believe you, I said. You don't know me, she said. You shouldn't just believe me. I looked at her, this very small, very composed child, who'd been alone on a strange station for most of a day and night, sitting under the stars because it felt right, being precise about Sorisi grammar while holding something tight in her hands because it was the only anchor she had. I've been reading cargo manifests for 4 years, I said. You get pretty good at knowing when something checks out. She looked at me. You're very strange, she said. Yeah, I said. Cass, can I get another one of those honey drinks? What happened next was about 2 hours of bureaucratic navigation, which I'll condense because the frustration of it doesn't need to be dragged out. I took Riel to the station's civilian assistance office on level 5 and filed a dependent welfare report, which should have triggered an automatic response from the station's coordination team within 30 minutes. An hour later, nothing had happened, so I followed up with a direct call to the duty administrator, a man named Fortis who was technically responsible for interjurisdictional welfare cases, but who spent most of his time trying to avoid dealing with anything that involved the sovereignty's representatives. The child's mother is in sovereignty jurisdiction right now, Fortis told me, not quite meeting my eyes on the call screen. There's nothing we can do until they complete their review. How long does a review take? That's up to them. Has anyone contacted their delegation office, checked on the status of the detainee? I've sent a query. When? This morning. What time this morning? A pause. Look, Rourke, I understand this is uncomfortable. What time did you send the query? He looked at something off-screen. The query will go out this afternoon. I closed the call. I looked at Riel, who was sitting in the chair next to me in the assistant's office, very upright, the round object held in both hands, watching me with those amber eyes. That didn't work, she said. Not yet, I said. What are you going to do? I thought about it. I knew a few people. The station had a UEF liaison officer, a woman named Commander Voss, who I'd worked with on a couple of cargo dispute cases. She was competent and direct and didn't enjoy bureaucratic obstruction any more than I did. I'm going to make a couple of calls, I said. And while I'm doing that, you are going to stay right here, in this room, with the door closed. Don't go anywhere. She nodded. What's in your hand? I asked, because I'd been wondering since the beginning. She looked down at it. Very slowly, she opened her hands and showed me. It was a communication sphere, a Sorisi-designed personal comms device, very old, the kind they used to make before the standardized UEF-compatible units became universal. Smooth and dark with a faint iridescent sheen about the size of an apple, a single seam around the equator where it opened. My mother's, she said. She gave it to me before they took her. She said to keep it close and not let anyone take it. Does it still work? Riel pressed a small spot near the seam. The sphere emitted a faint pulse of gold light, the same color as the luminescent tracery on her neck, and then went quiet. The signal's blocked here, she said. The Sovereignty uses signal suppression in the level 1 review zone. I can feel it even up here like static in the air. She looked at me. There are things on this sphere that my mother needed to protect, important things. I don't know exactly what they are. She said I wouldn't understand yet. A pause. She's a scholar, a historian. She studies old sovereignty records, things from before the Assembly's current leadership. I looked at the sphere. I thought about what a Sorisi historian might carry on a personal communications device that would make sovereignty soldiers interested in detaining her. I thought about the way Riel was holding it. Keep it close, I said. Don't let anyone take it. She nodded. I went out to the corridor to make my calls. Account of Cass Thurridge, Commerce Ring Vendor, Level 4. Recorded November 2, 2284. I want to say before anything that Nate Rourke is one of the decent ones. And I don't mean that in a soft way. I mean decent the way a good load-bearing wall is decent, solid, reliable, not going to surprise you. He'd been coming to my alcove for coffee almost every morning for 4 years, and I knew his order before he asked, and I knew his face when something was wrong, and something was wrong that whole day, but he kept his voice even and his face calm, and he kept going. That matters. I want that on record. I saw the soldiers arrive on level 4 around the mid-cycle. There were 4 of them. Velhari, you know the Velhari. Tall, silver-blue scales, bilateral symmetry, but the joints bend the wrong way by human standards. They were GSA trade security in the standard sovereignty uniform, dark red and black with the assembly sigil on the chest, the one that looks like 3 concentric rings with a central point. They wore full armor, not combat armor, but the formal enforcement type, plated and sealed with the face shields up. Their sidearms were holstered but unconcealed. 4 soldiers to walk through a civilian commerce ring. I watched them come through the ring entrance and I thought, this is not a routine check. 4 soldiers with that posture, moving with that kind of coordinated purpose, is not someone checking vendor licenses. They stopped at stall 42 first. I could see it from my alcove. One of them spoke to the vendor there, Priya, who runs the noodle cart and had originally noticed Riel waiting under the arch. I could see Priya's face from across the ring. She kept her expression neutral, but her hands went still on her counter, and I know Priya well enough to know that's fear. 1 soldier stayed to keep asking Priya questions. The other 3 spread out across the ring. They were looking for something. Or someone. I went to the back of my alcove and sent Rook a message on my personal comm unit. Soldiers on the ring, 4 Velhari. They're asking around at 42. You need to know. Return to Nathaniel Rourke's account. I was in the corridor outside the assistant's office when Cass's message came through. I stared at it for a second. Then I looked at the door to the assistant's office where I'd left Riel. Then I went back in. She was still in the chair, exactly as I'd left her, but her posture had changed. She was very still in a different way than before, the stillness of someone who has heard something or felt something. You felt it, didn't you? I said, not a question. The soldiers, she said. They're using a proximity tracker. I can feel it through the sphere. It's scanning for the sphere's signal. I thought about that. How good is the tracker? Enough to find it on this level, she said quietly. Maybe better. I don't know. She looked at me, and for the first time since I'd found her, the careful composure cracked slightly, not dramatically, just a small fracture. They're not here to check my mother's documents, are they? No, I said, I don't think they are. She looked at the sphere in her hands. There are things on this sphere, she said again. I didn't understand why it mattered, but she stopped, steadied herself. A 4-year-old, or whatever age she actually was, pulling herself together with more self-possession than most adults manage. What do we do? And here's the moment. If you're looking for the moment when everything changed, not just for me, but for all of it, for the way it ended, for the reason I'm sitting in this hospital room telling you this story, it was here. Right here, in the civilian assistant's office on level 5 of Velos 9 station, with this small child looking at me, and the sound of 4 sovereignty soldiers starting to move through the commerce ring below. I could have handed her to the office staff and stepped back. That would have been reasonable. That would have been safe. The sovereignty's people would have found her, taken the sphere, and whatever was on it would have disappeared into their administrative machinery, and maybe nothing would have come of it, or maybe something would, but it wouldn't have been my problem. But she'd said, I waited, all night under the stars because her mother had said to find a safe place. And she'd sat there and waited, and she'd corrected my Sorisi grammar very gently, and she'd told me the documents were real, and she'd said, You're very strange, and she'd shown me the sphere like a small secret trust. And she was 4 years old, or whatever she was, and she was alone, and something was very wrong, and I was the person standing there. We move, I said, come on. She slid off the chair and took my hand. Her hand was very small. Running on a station is different from running on a planet. The geometry is different. Frontier stations like Velos 9 are built on a cylinder design, which means the corridors curve slightly upward in front of you and curve slightly upward behind you, and everything is enclosed, and the lighting doesn't change the way sky does, so your sense of direction is entirely dependent on the level indicators and corridor markers on the walls. You can't get outside. There's no outside. There's just the station all the way around. What this means, practically, is that if someone is tracking a signal on your level, there aren't that many places to go. You can go up or down. The lift shafts and stairwells are distributed at regular intervals. You can move around the ring, but a ring is a ring, and eventually you come back to where you started. You can go to the maintenance corridors, which run between the main corridors and the outer hull, but those are tight and poorly lit, and you need an access code to get into most of them. I knew the maintenance corridors. 4 years of cargo work means you know every access point on a station. I also knew that a proximity tracker trying to find a small sphere would probably lose the signal in the interference of the maintenance corridors, where the hull shielding creates its own electromagnetic scatter. "Trust me," I said to Riel. "I'm still holding your hand, aren't I?" she said. We went through a service door between level 5 residential and the maintenance corridor access point, which I opened with my cargo clearance badge. The door was heavy and the corridor beyond it was dim, emergency lighting only, orange-tinged, the hum of the station's ventilation systems very loud. The air smelled of recycled atmosphere and the faint metallic tang of the hull material. "Can you still feel the tracker?" I asked. Riel concentrated. The sphere in her free hand pulsed once that soft gold light. "Less," she said. "It's like the sound went down, like turning a dial." "Good, stay close." We moved through the maintenance corridor. I knew this section well. I'd been through it plenty of times when equipment needed to be routed to cargo areas without going through the main ring. There was a junction about 30 meters ahead where the corridor split. One branch went down toward level 3, the other toward the technical service rooms on level 5's outer ring. I was trying to think about what came next. The immediate problem, getting Riel out of range of the tracker, was being solved. But the larger problem was still there. A Sorisi historian held in a sovereignty review room on level 1, a communications sphere that the sovereignty soldiers were willing to walk openly through a civilian commerce ring to retrieve. And me, a cargo manifest checker, holding the hand of the historian's child in a maintenance corridor. I needed to talk to Commander Voss. I needed to talk to her now, not via message. "How fast can you walk?" I asked Riel. "Faster than I look," she said. Account of Commander Heva Voss, UEF Station Liaison, Velos 9. Recorded November 5, 2284. I want to be clear about the jurisdictional situation before I describe what happened, because people tend to simplify it, and the simplification loses something important. Velos 9 operates under the Frontier Station Compact of 2251, which establishes a joint jurisdiction framework between UEF member stations and Galactic Sovereignty Assembly partners operating under the Margin Accords. In practice, this means the sovereignties trade security escorts. Their soldiers have the right to conduct document reviews and detentions in the transit zones of Level 1, subject to notification of the UEF liaison office within 2 hours of any detention. The operative clause is subject to notification. I had received no notification about the detention of a Sorisi traveler. None. Zero. Not within 2 hours, not within 12 hours. And when Rurk had his admin assistant send a query through official channels, which I didn't find out until later, the query had been intercepted and routed to Fortis, who was, at the time, actively avoiding putting anything in writing about the sovereignty. What I received was Nate Rurk showing up at my office door looking like he'd been doing something he couldn't explain in a standard report, with a small Sorisi child behind him who was holding a communication sphere, and watching me with the kind of eyes that made me want to be very careful about whatever I said next. "Rurk," I said, "why are you in the maintenance access corridor that connects to my emergency exit?" "I needed to avoid the level 4 ring," he said. "There are 4 Velhari trade security on it." I looked at the child. "This is Riel," he said. "Her mother is being held in a sovereignty review room on level 1 without UEF notification. Riel has her mother's personal effects, which the soldiers appear to be attempting to recover via proximity tracking. I need you to tell me what our options are." I had been a UEF liaison officer for 9 years. I had dealt with the sovereignty's representatives in various configurations across 3 different stations. I knew their protocols. I knew their law. I knew what the compact said, and I knew what the compact meant, and I knew the space between those 2 things where things went wrong. I looked at the sphere. I looked at Riel. "Come in," I said. "Both of you close the door." Account of Nathaniel Rurk continued. Voss's office was a clean, spare room with more screens than chairs and a viewport that looked out toward the Velos asteroid belt. She sat behind her desk. I sat across from her. Riel sat next to me, the sphere in her lap, watching Voss with those amber eyes. "The notification requirement," Voss said, "is unambiguous. Any detention of a non-combatant traveler in the transit zone requires UEF notification within 2 hours. If they haven't notified us, they're in violation of the compact. Which means what practically? I asked. It means I have grounds to demand access to the detainee and a review of the detention. She paused. It doesn't mean they'll cooperate. The sovereignty's local commander, Escort Captain Varen Sol, has been interpretive with the compact requirements before. Interpretive, I repeated. He finds ways to comply with the letter of the requirement while violating the spirit of it. He's skilled at it. She looked at the sphere. May I ask what's on the device? I don't know exactly, I said. I know a little, Riel said quietly. We both looked at her. She held the sphere very carefully. My mother is a historical scholar. She studies the GSA's early period, before the Assembly's third restructuring in 2241, before the current leadership families gained their positions. She looked at Voss. She found something. In the archive records she accessed on the outer colonies. She didn't tell me all of it, but she said it was important. She said it was the kind of thing that some people would want to stay hidden. What kind of thing? Voss asked carefully. Riel looked at her for a moment. The kind of thing that proves the third restructuring wasn't what they say it was, she said. The kind of thing that proves 3 of the current Assembly's senior leadership families weren't actually, that their status claims aren't valid. That they took those positions through, she paused, choosing her word very deliberately for a child her age, through methods that weren't legitimate. Silence in the office. I looked at Voss. Voss looked at the sphere. How old are you? She asked Riel. By your calendar, 9, Riel said. Sorissi mature differently. 9, Voss said quietly, and your mother trusted you with this. She didn't have much choice, Riel said simply. It was either give it to me or let them take it. Voss was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, Rourke, I want you to take Riel to the secure room off this office, the one I use for confidential interviews. It's shielded. No signal gets in or out. The proximity tracker won't reach her in there. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone except me, and I will use the 3-knock code that you and I both know from the Pelly's cargo dispute 2 years ago. She was already pulling on her uniform jacket, her face set and calm and very focused. I'm going to go to level 1 and have a conversation with Escort Captain Varen Sol about his compliance with the margin accords. And if he doesn't cooperate, I asked. Then I'm going to make it very official and very loud, she said, and I'm going to enjoy it. I took Riel to the secure room. It was small, a table, 2 chairs, a water dispenser, the kind of basic comfort that got assembled when someone decided a confidential interview room needed to feel slightly less institutional. The shielding was obvious from the moment the door closed, a particular quality of quiet, like the room had been insulated from the rest of the universe. Riel sat at the table and put the sphere in front of her. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Do you think they'll let her go? Riel asked. Yes, I said, because that was what I needed to say. She looked at me. You're not sure, she said. I thought about lying and decided against it. She'd been precise about grammar and patient about waiting and honest about what she knew and didn't know, and she deserved the same back. I'm not sure, I said. Voss is good at her job, but the people she's dealing with have done this before, Riel finished quietly. My mother said that. She said the reason it was important to document what she found was because they'd done it before. Made things disappear. Made people. She stopped. I waited. She said the sphere was insurance, Riel said. If anything happened, the sphere was proof. I thought about that. Is there a way to transmit what's on it? If the shielding in here is blocking the tracker, maybe we could get a signal out too. There's a way, Riel said. She turned the sphere slowly in her hands. My mother showed me. There's an emergency broadcast function, built for exactly this kind of situation. A pause. If I activate it, it sends a compressed signal package to the Sorissi Guild Compact's legal archives. It's designed to punch through signal suppression. Through most kinds of shielding, she looked at me. But once I activate it, they'll know where we are immediately. There it was. I looked at her, she looked at me. Your call, I said. It's your mother's sphere. She thought about it, and I watched her think, really watched her, a 9-year-old Sorissi child working through something that most adults would struggle with. The weight of it on her face, the careful turning of it in her mind. Not yet, she said finally. Let's see if Voss can bring her back, if she can. She set the sphere down. If she can, my mother decides, not me. Okay, I said. But if she can't, Riel said, then we use it, regardless of what happens after. Okay, I said again. We sat in the quiet room and waited. Account of Commander Heva Voss continued. I want to describe the Level 1 transit zone briefly, because it matters for what happened. The transit zone is a wide corridor that runs the circumference of Level 1's inner ring, separated from the docking bays by security doors. It's designed for passenger processing. There are checking stations at regular intervals, a waiting area, access to the station's medical screening room, and at the far end, the review facilities, 3 rooms built specifically for the sovereignty's use under the Margin Accords. I went to the review facilities directly. The sovereignty had 2 guards posted outside, Velhari, same uniform as the ones on the commerce ring. They stepped into my path when I approached. Liaison Officer Voss, I said, holding up my credentials. I'm here to speak with Escort Captain Sol regarding an outstanding notification requirement under Article 7 of the Frontier Station Compact. The escort captain is occupied, one of them said. I'll wait, I said. There was a pause. They looked at each other in the way that people look at each other when they're trying to figure out how to make a problem go away and can't find the right answer. Sol came out about 4 minutes later. He was tall even for a Velhari, close to 2.5 meters, silver blue scales, the formal uniform with the assembly sigil prominent on his chest. He had the bearing of someone who was used to being the most important person in any room he walked into. He looked at me with the polite disdain that sovereignty officials often deploy as their first conversational move. Commander Voss, he said, I believe your office sent a query regarding a review currently in progress. I did, I said. I'm following up in person, as the 2-hour notification window expired approximately 16 hours ago. The review is ongoing. Notification will be provided upon its completion. That's not how the notification requirement works, I said. Under Article 7, Clause 3 of the Compact, notification is required within 2 hours of the initiation of any detention, not upon its completion. You are currently 16 hours in violation. We have a different legal interpretation. That interpretation is incorrect, I said, and I kept my voice exactly even, exactly calm, exactly the voice of someone who knows precisely what documents she's prepared to file. Escort Captain, I have a Sorisi traveler with a dependent child unaccounted for since yesterday's mid-cycle. I have a notification violation that I am now formally recording in the UEF liaison log, and I have a request, which I am now making formally and on record, for immediate access to the detainee. He looked at me. The detainee is under sovereignty jurisdiction, he said. Access is at the discretion of. The compact does not grant you discretion over access to a traveler whose dependent child is in UEF civilian welfare custody, I said. It grants you a review period with notification. You are in violation of the notification requirement, which means the review extension provisions do not apply, which means this detention is, as of this moment, unauthorized under the compact. Silence. Behind me, I was aware that 2 more Velhari soldiers had appeared at the far end of the corridor. I didn't look at them. I kept my eyes on Sol. I want the detainee brought out, I said, now in the next 5 minutes. Or I file a formal compact violation with the UEF Regional Commissioner's Office and request an immediate audit of all sovereignty activities on Velos 9. A pause, which I am fully prepared to do. Something moved in Sol's face, not much, but something. There will be consequences to this interference, he said very quietly. There will be consequences to this violation, I said. Produce the detainee escort captain. They brought her out 6 minutes later. Her name, I learned, was Dr. Samara, Riel's mother. She was taller than Riel, with the same pale blue-gray coloring and the same amber eyes. She was wearing the same practical travel clothes she'd arrived in. She hadn't been mistreated physically. The medical scan I insisted on confirmed that. But she was exhausted, and there was something in her expression that I recognized. The particular exhaustion of someone who has spent hours being very carefully afraid. When she saw me, she said, "My daughter, where is my daughter?" "She's safe," I said. "She's with someone I trust." Something went through her face, something vast and releasing. "The sphere," she said. "She has it," I said. She closed her eyes for 1 second, just one. Then she opened them and straightened her spine and said, "I would like to leave this facility, please." "Yes," I said, "you would." Account of Nathaniel Rourke continued. I got Voss's message about 40 minutes after she'd left for level 1. Detainee released, coming up with her now, 3 levels out, stay put. I showed the message to Riel. She read it, her face did that thing again, the thing where something huge and controlled was happening behind very careful eyes. "Okay," she said, "just that, but I could hear what was in it." "Your mother's okay," I said, "she's coming." Riel put her hand flat over the sphere, like pressing a palm over something precious. "I knew," she said, "I hoped, but I knew." I almost said something then, something about how she'd done so well, about how she'd been so brave, which was both true and not quite the right word, because brave implies overcoming fear and she hadn't been fearless. She'd just been persistent and patient and clear-eyed, and those things are different and in some ways more remarkable. I didn't say any of that because the moment didn't need it. We waited. About 20 minutes later, I heard 3 knocks in the specific pattern that Voss and I had used 2 years ago on the Pelly's case. I opened the door. Voss was there. Behind her was Dr. Samara. I got out of the way. Riel moved past me so fast, she was almost a blur for something her size. I looked away. Some moments don't need witnesses. I heard in Sorisi a sound that doesn't translate well, something between a name and a breath and a word, layered together. The way you say someone's name when you've been afraid for a long time and they're finally there. When I looked back, Dr. Samara was on her knees on the floor of Voss's secure room and Riel was in her arms and the sphere was between them, still glowing that soft gold, and they were both quiet in the way that comes after something terrible has stopped. Voss looked at me. "We have a problem," she said quietly so only I could hear. "Sol wasn't happy about releasing her. His people on the commerce ring haven't been recalled. They're still looking." I thought about that, for the sphere. "For the sphere," she confirmed. "He released Dr. Samara because he had to, but he hasn't given up on recovering it." She paused. "Whoever that sphere reaches when it transmits the Sorisi Guild Compact, whoever else, the information on it becomes public record. He cannot allow that." "So what do we do?" I asked. Voss looked at the mother and child on the floor of her secure room. "I think," she said, "we need to let the sphere do what it was designed to do, and then we need to deal with whatever comes after." Account of Dr. Samara Riel Koth, Scholar, Sorisi Outer Colony Historical Society. Recorded November 8, 2284. Present, Archivist Akaffer, UEF Historical Division. I will try to explain what was on the sphere, because I understand it matters for the record. In the early months of 2284, I was conducting archival research in the Historical Records Storage Facility on Outer Colony Station, Keshari. My area of study is the early period of the Galactic Sovereignty Assembly, specifically, the decade surrounding what they call the Third Restructuring of 2241, when the Assembly's governance structure was reorganized and several new senior leadership families took prominent positions. The official history of the Third Restructuring describes it as a voluntary reorganization, a consensus decision by member species to modernize the Assembly's structure. This is what every official sovereignty document says. It is what sovereignty representatives have maintained publicly for 43 years. What I found in the Keshari facility was a set of records that told a different story. Not dramatically different, not a coup or an armed takeover. Smaller than that, and in some ways more damaging. A systematic campaign of documentation fraud. A coordinated effort by 3 allied species factions to establish false lineage claims, forge consensus records, and insert their own representatives into senior assembly positions by manipulating the verification processes that were supposed to validate succession. The current first arbiter of the Assembly's governance compact, the single most powerful administrative position in the sovereignty, holds that position based on a family lineage claim that the records I found prove is fabricated. This is what was on the sphere. Not just my analysis, the original documents. Scans of physical records from the Keshari facility, cross-referenced with public records from 3 other archives, with my notation linking them together. The kind of evidence that, if transmitted to the right legal repository, cannot be unseen. That's why they wanted it. That's why they took me. They didn't harm me physically because harm creates records of its own. They intended to hold me until they could find and recover the sphere. And then, I believe, they intended to argue some technical violation of my researcher's access and have me formally removed from the station on those grounds. A clean solution. I disappear from the frontier with the data, and no one in the inner ring cares enough about a Sorisi historian on a frontier station to ask questions. What they didn't plan for was Riel. She's 9 years old and she has more sense than most adults I know. And she found a human with a cargo scanner and a willingness to sit on the floor. And she held onto that sphere for 22 hours in a strange station while I was in a room trying to keep my face calm. She held on. Now, what I want to say about Nathaniel Rourke. He wasn't there when I was released. I didn't meet him in the corridor. But Riel had told me in those first minutes in Commander Voss's secure room what happened. She told me about the arch and the coffee and the way he'd sat on the floor next to her so he wasn't looming. She told me about the maintenance corridor and the 3-knock code, and that he'd said your call when she asked about the broadcast, because it was her mother's sphere and not his decision. I don't have formal words for what that is. In Sorisi we have a concept, Velsari, which roughly translates as someone who stands in the gap when the gap opens. It's not exactly bravery. It's a specific kind of presence, being the person who is there and staying there. I want that on the record. Velsari. Return to Nathaniel Rourke's account. We activated the broadcast from Voss's office. Riel held the sphere and pressed the activation point, a small spot on the seam, slightly recessed. The sphere opened along its equator, both halves folding back like a flower, revealing the transmission core inside, a small crystal structure that pulsed with light beginning to charge. Dr. Samara told us it would take about 90 seconds to compress and transmit. The longest 90 seconds of my life, probably. At the 40-second mark, every alert on Voss's office screen went off simultaneously. There in the corridor, Voss said, reading her screens. She was calm in the way trained people are calm in emergencies, not emotionally flat but focused, with the calm as a tool rather than an absence. I heard it then, in the corridor outside. Footsteps, multiple, coordinated, the particular rhythm of soldiers moving fast with purpose. How long? I asked Dr. Samara. 45 more seconds, she said. The door handle moved. The lock held. Voss's office had a UEF security door, physical bolt plus electronic lock, which required either Voss's credentials or a level of force that would leave very visible evidence. A voice on the other side. Velhari in Sovereignty Standard, open this door, escort captain's authority. This office is UEF jurisdiction, Voss said through the door, not moving from her screens. You do not have authority here. Any attempt to breach this door will be logged as a violation of the Frontier Station Compact and immediately transmitted to the UEF Regional Commissioner. Silence. Then lower, breach it. I put myself between the door and the mother and child. I want to be very clear about what I was thinking in that moment, because people have asked me and I want the record to be accurate. I wasn't thinking about heroism. I wasn't thinking about history or the records on the sphere or the political implications. I was thinking, there is a door and there is a child behind me, and if someone comes through that door, they are going to have to come through me first, and I am going to make that as difficult as possible for them. That's all. That's the whole thought. The sphere pulsed bright gold, brighter than I'd seen it before, and Dr. Samara said very quietly, "Sent." The door came off its hinges 2 seconds later.